Rod, thanks for coming and joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I'm run field marketing for Aviatrix, and my career, I've been a networking guy for a long time. When I first started building networks, it was big yellow thick cables that you had to wrestle like an anaconda to get in the floor, and I've kind of grown through everything that's happened in networking, really.
Cool. Well, in prepping for this, when you first came in, we started talking a little bit about your history, and I'm kind of fascinated with your history in the startup world, and specifically the startup world in Silicon Valley, where you currently reside, right? So, can you tell us a little bit about kind of what you've seen over the years as you've jumped from successful startup to maybe not so successful startup to another successful startup? I mean, there was a laundry list there that you went through. So, can you talk a little bit about that history and where you are today?
Sure. I mean, I've been doing startups since '97. All of them have had to do with networking or network management, network security. But startups are the thing you have to find the right product market fit, and sometimes you don't find the right fit. But you learn a lot at all of them, whether they're successful or not. You find out what customers are looking for, what they're doing, where their pains are, and then you switch, right? When you find that you're not on the right horse, you go to another one. I think I told you guys that I think I'm on my ninth now. I've had 3 good ones, so learned a lot from all of them.
That's awesome. Well, we've been working with SynerComm for a while, and they've always kind of been on the cutting edge of working with newer companies. I think that's probably some of the secret sauce in SynerComm. So before we start getting into the nerdy stuff here, can you tell us a little bit about what Aviatrix does? Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
Aviatrix. Yeah, it means female pilot.
Right.
The company was started by a Chinese woman and back in 2014, but really things didn't start happening till the last couple of years. Steve Mullaney became the CEO, and actually there was a lot of movement in enterprises going to the cloud, really going to the cloud, right? Over the last 5 years, you heard about the cloud. I mean, I think I've been talking about the cloud for 10 years, but enterprises started talking about it, but they didn't really mean it. They didn't actually go to the cloud. They just kind of played around with it. So in the last 2 years, we've really seen enterprises really move business critical things into the cloud. And it's not a technology thing. It's a movement for business reasons because they need to be able to be more agile. Agility has become as important to business critical as security or reliability or availability, the things that we traditionally thought as business critical.
And you mentioned that in the last 2 or 3 years it's really taken off. So I'm really interested in that because when I said I was going to be talking to you, I was talking to a large insurance company that about 5 years ago tried to go into a multi-cloud environment. And he had since moved on to a different position in that company, and he said, why? He says, that was a disaster for us. We had to have people that knew Amazon. We had to have people that knew Azure. We had to have people that knew VMware. And it was just very difficult. You lose a person, key skill sets. So I think that plays into what you're
Absolutely.
solving.
Yeah, I mean, that's Aviatrix is a multi-cloud solution, right? We make it so that people can build the network the same way in AWS as they build it in Azure, as they build it in Google, and make it consistent across all of them. So there's consistent security, there's consistent, visibility, there's consistent automation. And so this is what makes it a lot easier. So as you mentioned, a lot of enterprises over the years have seen the need for going multi-cloud, but it's very difficult because the way networking and security is done is different. So you have to have different skills from different people. So you might have an expert in AWS, but he knows nothing about how it's done in Azure. So that becomes a real problem. So when you can do it the same across, it becomes a much better architecture to build on top of.
And we also see clients that take a lot of the traditional solutions like premise-based firewalls and trying to move them into the cloud. What is a cloud-aware firewall, and what does that mean? What are the examples of some of the services that a cloud-aware firewall might leverage versus a traditional firewall?
So, we have partnerships with the traditional firewall vendors like Palo Alto Networks and Check Point and so forth, but as they take their virtual version and put it in the cloud, it's not that there's any problem with their virtual version. It's great. It does the same thing that it did on-prem. It's how you have to actually integrate that into the cloud, and all of the manual things that people have to do to set up the routes, to send traffic to be inspected, to manage how that's done in the cloud is very different. And so this is one of the things that Aviatrix does well with what we call FireNet, which is the ability to bring those next generation firewalls, stick them in there, and automate the entire process of getting that put into the cloud. The SEs love us, right? The sales guys maybe not, because we come in and all of a sudden the conversation starts going to what Aviatrix does. But yeah, it's.
So can you overlay like the Aviatrix on there? So a lot of people started their journey a few years ago. What are the common problems they're running into now as they've moved into this multi-cloud journey? And how are people addressing it?
Well, I'd say the biggest problem is that they've gone down a path, right? They started to build with do-it-yourself and the native constructs, which is completely understandable because, when you first start, you're kind of building it out very small and the networking works and, everybody's happy. But as you get to, kind of enterprise class requirements, now you start needing visibility, you start needing end-to-end encryption and high-performance encryption, and you want to be able to take the networking capability that you had on-prem and do it in the cloud, things like BGP, path prepending, and traffic engineering and stuff like that. And, they need a way to do that. So the way that we help customers do that is we allow there to be a migration, right? You can keep operating what's already brownfield deployed, but now you can put in this new kind of multi-cloud network infrastructure, even if you're just starting in a single cloud, and then over time you migrate those VPCs or those VNets and you connect them into the multi-cloud architecture so you get that additional visibility and other things.
And as a customer takes on that additional resiliency and complexity, what are some of the benefits they'll see? A lot of times people are going to say, well, I need to leverage cost. Why would I need to do that? Why don't I'm comfortable with Amazon. Why would I need to venture into these other clouds?
Well, there's a lot of things that actually drive multi-cloud. And it's funny because at one point in time, I think people thought it was you wanted to create a application that was mobile and you could move it and then you could arbitrage costs between clouds. Nobody's doing that, right? The reason that you need multiple clouds is because sometimes applications simply run better in one cloud than the other. So for instance, if you're Office 365, that's going to run better in Azure than it is anywhere else. And if you're doing TensorFlow for machine learning, you're going to want to be in Google. And if you have an Oracle database, it's going to be in Oracle. Now, AWS has great capabilities in terms of application development. A lot of people use those tools, right? So one cloud versus the other. But there are other things that are really business reasons, because IT a lot of times doesn't get to make the decision. They might not even be in the room when the decision is made because business decides we're going to acquire this customer. Well, that customer is running in a different cloud. All of a sudden, you need to be multi-cloud. You can't just take everything and move it into the primary cloud or a customer-driven. I can give you a great example of a company. We have one of our customers called Verint, and Verint told us we will never be in anything but AWS. And we said, great, and that'll be true right up until the time it's not true, right? And it took about 60 days, and they called us up and said, good news, we're going multi-cloud, right? And the reason was they had a new customer come in, and that customer was YouTube. And YouTube said, over our dead body, are you putting all this data in AWS? You have to show us that you can do this in Google. And they were able to do it in 2 weeks and told us that if they had not had Aviatrix deployed in AWS, they would not have been able to get that customer, and it's now their number one customer. So a lot of reasons to go multi-cloud.
Gartner calls this category like cloud networking.
Cloud networking,
Cloud networking.
Yes.
So if you had to put your hat on, where is this going in the next year or two? What else do people need to be aware of so they don't run into the same problem they just ran into two years ago? Because how do you know what you don't know when the tools aren't even invented yet, kind of like the Steve Jobs, right? You can't ask somebody that has a horse if they'd want a faster horse. They didn't know about a car.
That's right.
And that's what's going on in this industry right now.
Well, I think one of the big things is just learn what's available out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we have all kinds of training that people can go through. We have something called Aviatrix ACE, and there's an associate, and there's a professional, and there's operator. There's a bunch of different levels. But the associate training is actually really good because it's not about Aviatrix. It's about how networking is done in each one of the clouds. And then maybe a little bit at the end about how we can pull it all together. But it really opens people's eyes to what the limitations are and what they should be considering. So get yourself trained, maybe go to one of our flight schools, which actually is labs that you can try and do some things in. But that's, I think, the biggest thing is be aware of what's happening.
I know Steve Mahoney says this is just starting. He said 2% into where this is headed. He
yeah,
said this is.
Yeah.
I
think Jassy said 4% of all enterprise workloads are in the cloud at this time, right? And people are looking at AWS and saying, it's $50 billion. This thing is like almost over. No, we're like in the second batter of the first inning, right? This is going to be big.
People have always said that, right? Like, remember, we kind of grew up in the PC industry, and Bill Gates, whatever's coming, they don't know what the internet a lot yet. It's way bigger, and everybody's like, it can't be bigger.
Oh, and it was gigantic, right?
Exactly, right. And just each phase keeps to come on, and then the cloud came on, and no one thought the cloud was internet, and then it was cloud, and then it's just amazing how these things keep to evolve. So if you had to put your little hat on, what is next? What's the next big paradigm shift?
Well, I think this movement into the cloud is it's the cloud era, right? It's going to happen. It's going to be 10 times bigger, like we just said, but it's going to happen 1,000 times faster. I mean, think about what it took as we went through our careers in the data center growth, right? What it took to actually build out a data center. I mean, there's boxes and racks and screwing things in and configuring. It takes months and months to build out a data center. You can literally go into the cloud and build out the equivalent of a data center in a matter of days, right? I mean, just boom, and you've got the same thing. And people are doing it regularly now, right? So I think that this move into the cloud is going to change the operations of how people do it. Like I said, agility and the way how fast things happen is going to be very important.
Do you guys have your eye on the quantum computing, just out of curiosity, and what impact that would have on?
Well, we don't spend a lot of time thinking about quantum
curious
computing
because I was talking to one of the gentlemen, an author, and he's just written a book on it. And, it's going to have a big impact on security, apparently, and how some of the decryption and all that.
I'll tell you what we do see as the kind of the future, right? For the last 2 decades, we've heard infrastructure companies talk about self-optimized or application optimized, and we never really got to that promise, right? Because there was always something where somebody had to go in and tweak something. But now we've gotten to the point where everything is software in the cloud. Everything is controlled via an API. And when you have something like Aviatrix as the data plane, which means we can see everything that's going on, all of a sudden now you can optimize for performance, or you can optimize for cost, or you can optimize for security, and even have sliders on each one of those to let AI think about how am I going to optimize for this application in this infrastructure, and you can actually do the controls. You can actually change the infrastructure to do that optimization. So I think that's where you're going to see things happen, and you can see how that would even increase the speed even more about the way things happen.
I kind of see it comes down to 3 things with the cloud, right? There's compute capacity, there's storage capacity, and there's networking capacity. A couple of things, though, that I think people always got to think about is the networking capacity. It seems like the bandwidth is going to go up and up, but the speed of light is still an issue. So you have to that creates complexity, that latency of the speed of light. And then I don't know if this is right or not, but I like to think of AI as just intelligent automation. Really at the end of the day, that's all it really is. Of course, people they use these big terms, and people get all
it does do machine learning, so it does have the ability to see and make decisions on a lot of data that humans have never been able to do at a scale humans can't do. Yeah.
So and the other thing is, though, with all this move to the cloud and all these APIs, the complexity is going through the roof. You talk about the old network model of Metcalfe's law or whatever, where the more connections you have, the more possible connections you have. So for us, the good thing is I think the security ramifications probably for you of all this are also there's going to be a lot of finding systems that are mature enough to keep the security issues under control.
Yeah, and the visibility, the troubleshooting capabilities, right? I mean, it is very complex. And who's the first one that gets blamed when the application's not working, right? It's the network,
Back
right?
to the modem days, right?
Yeah,
It's the
and
network,
you have to actually prove it's not the network
Right,
before you can actually go and start looking at, say, the application side of things.
So we're kind of rebuilding. I remember we're old. I mean, we did parallel port jobs before there was even networking.
Oh, yeah.
Then you had hubs and switches and modems. And,
Yeah, oh, yeah.
And now we're kind of rebuilding all this in a virtual world on top of all that. So it's
That's
almost like
exactly
the
right.
evolution of everything. It's
It is.
really
It's
powerful.
Yeah, if you look at computing in general, it's all about abstractions, right?
Right,
And so this is just yet another abstraction
Right.
so that you can make it faster, make it easier.
Make it seem easy. Somebody that's building those Ethernet chips, there's a lot of complexity in building that.
They're
but you don't
still
have to
down
see
there
that, right?
somewhere, but you don't
see
have
it,
to
though.
worry about
Right.
it. Yeah.
Well, that was really nerdy. So let's try to simplify this as we wrap this up. So I've been hearing about multi-cloud for a while, right? And as you know, a lot of manufacturers and technology companies like to change kind of buzzwords and make new buzzwords and call that the new industry. So what has really changed over the last couple of years? Because I've noticed that this term multi-cloud is really starting to take off. And I'd like to see from your perspective, why is the time now versus, 2 years ago, maybe even a year ago, what has really changed fundamentally to bring us to today?
Well, I think that's a great point. And let me just say, multi-cloud, depending on who says it, means different things, right? So a lot of, let's say, SD-WAN kind of providers who will connect you to the cloud, they say, we connect you to multiple clouds, therefore we are multi-cloud networking. What we're talking about is actually networking inside multiple clouds and then across those clouds. And we even have services to connect to the clouds, but we also support the connect to the cloud vendors. So yeah, I think the thing that is different is that the actual networking that is cloud aware and inside the cloud. If you look at the Ciscos or Junipers of the world or Aristas that want to, they're kind of doing a little cloud washing, right? They're taking their existing stuff and then sticking it in at the edge of the cloud and calling it cloud networking. That's not what we're talking about. We go much further than that.
So what has changed and what has really fueled your growth? I saw there's a lot of news about your company and raising money and going to massive valuations. What has changed over the last year to get us there?
It's really the how enterprises are thinking about the cloud, right? It's that they are really going in, and not for technology reasons. It's not the technologist that's deciding, I'm going to do this because the technology now exists to do this. It's being driven at the C-level and the business decision because they need the agility, they need the speed, or they're going to be impacted from a business perspective. I mean, look, the large financials didn't move to the cloud right away until all of a sudden all these fintechs were really biting at their ankles. And now, sure, there's going to be some acquisitions and some consolidation, but at the same time, even the big financials now are understanding that there's a huge value of being in the cloud.
Well, Rod, I really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on IT Trendsetters.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was good.